Hey, it's Dave Brown here, host of Now with Dave Brown on AMI. Check out this latest highlight from the show. Let's continue our conversation on design and inclusion. As provinces from coast to coast continue to try and stamp out the COVID-19 pandemic, they've been rolling out vaccine passports. A vaccine passport, which can be digital or hard copy, is a government confirmation that you've received 2 doses of an approved COVID-19 vaccine. The passport is meant to give you access to non-essential facilities like restaurants, gyms, sports, and entertainment venues. The province of Quebec, they were the first province through the door with this and developed their own passport application. Denis Boudreau is a digital accessibility specialist and has checked out the app. He's also the founder of Inclusive Communication. Hey, Denis, thank you so much for making time to join us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, Denis, let's jump into something that is pretty basic and on the front end. What was the process of getting the app like?
So the process is actually pretty straightforward if you are, pretty used to technology. So it wasn't a big deal for people like me, but it certainly was very difficult or complicated for some seniors that I know, like my mother-in-law, for instance, my own mother. Their friends, to them, it was actually quite complicated, and I've spent quite a bit of time setting up passport for other people as we got that going on at the beginning. So I would say, depending on your own skill set, yeah, it might have been very difficult for some.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even something like just jumping into an app store and downloading an app and setting it up, it's not something that's super commonplace. There's a lot of people who pick up their new smartphone and they just use the preloaded apps and that's that. They still use it as a phone. So it does speak to whether or not somebody has a cell phone. There still is a little bit of technical literacy that's required here.
Yeah, definitely. And, the idea of a QR code is not something that everybody understands either.
Mm-hmm.
So just getting people to understand, I'm thinking the elderly that I was helping there, just helping them to understand that there was a little square somewhere that they had gotten that had all the information in it. That alone was an interesting conversation. Let's put it this way.
So let's jump into some of the accessibility here. How did you find the process from an accessibility point of view? And once you were inside the app, did you notice any red flags?
Yeah, there were some. My very initial, thought on the app itself. Running VoiceOver through it. I'm sure a lot of the listeners are familiar with what VoiceOver is. A screen reader that's available in iOS. So I was testing that on my iPhone. Very first thought was that it seemed pretty good overall. Most of the controls or commands inside the application being labeled properly. So you would hear about 2 buttons. You would hear about what the button labels were, that sort of thing. But then on second, looking at it a little deeper, it occurred to me that actually there were significant issues with the logic or the predictability of it. So it's one thing when you're sighted and you're watching as you're swiping from one control to the other, and then you have the visual perspective of the entire app. It's easy to understand where you're going, and it looks pretty good. But I tried to sort of dissociate myself from the visual experience and just get a sense of what the logic would look like for someone who couldn't see the app and relied on screen reader software because they couldn't see what was going on. And from a intuitive, logical perspective, there are some elements lacking in there that could have made the experience much more, streamlined or better guided to understand what you were doing. You have to make a lot of assumptions, and I'm pretty sure that most people who are blind would not be able to make those assumptions unless someone had actually described the app to them so that they understand what's going on. And from that part is a little lacking. The biggest problem is probably just setting up your passport initially. I mean, getting the app, again, pretty straightforward if you know how to get to the Apple Store and download and install. But getting to the point where you can actually initiate your passport, scan or take a picture of or link to your proof, for instance, getting that in, getting a confirmation that it was done properly or successfully, that whole part is probably a significant challenge for most people.
What do you think could have been done to streamline that process? You mentioned that sort of some of the logic wasn't necessarily there. The process wasn't necessarily as straightforward for someone using a screen reader. So not that we want you to give away all the secret sauce here, but if you were sitting in Premier Legault's office this morning and you could give him some feedback on this, what would you say in regards to some things they could have done to make that a little bit easier to either get the information in there and get sort of everything signed up and logical?
Well, I think there was an intent, like purposeful intent, of making the app as straightforward as possible from a visual standpoint. So not a lot of information, not a lot of visuals, limited to the like minimalistic, if you will. And again, to someone who's sighted, works really well, I think. But it's missing these additional pieces of instructions that would help provide context to someone who can't benefit from the visual context. And whether it would have been some instructions that are off screen so you don't see them, but they're there. So as you're swiping from one object to the other on the page, you hear about these instructions being presented to you. That would have been a great addition. Also, better structuring this different screens so that you have a really clear understanding of what this screen is about. You get some text at the top, some label at the top that gives you that information, but this is not necessarily where you start when you get to the screen. So you have to find your way around the content to eventually go and find that main heading sitting at the top. So better guidance in that sense would have been useful as well. And just paying attention to some of the elements that were completely skipped when you were navigating through the content. So for instance, not that people care all that much for that part, but some of the visuals, like the logos from the government or logo from, I think they're called Aquinox, the developers of the app, those are completely skipped over, so you don't have that information at all. But the QR code itself, I mean, the one piece that you would think is the core of the application, you don't hear about it if you're using a screen reader. So interestingly enough, you just skip over that part. You go straight to your own vaccination proof, and then you can double tap that to open it, of course, and then you can read everything that's there. So you're not missing any of that information, but you still miss part of the context that gets you there.
Yeah.
So it would be, I guess, my main recommendation for the developers or for Mr. Legault would be, talk to these developers and then ask them to make sure that they actually ask people who had disabilities what they thought about it and whether or not that would work for them. Because I'm pretty sure that wasn't the case. Based on what I noticed there, some of the obvious things that were missing, they probably did everything that they could to make it work. And, kudos to them because there are good things in there. But it doesn't feel at all like someone who is visually impaired, for instance, actually got a say in whether or not that worked well for them. And if they had, some of these things that I just mentioned would have been addressed, automatically.
Yeah. It's something that we talked about before. I remember we did a segment in the spring or in the late winter talking about how sometimes the checklist becomes the enemy of true inclusion and accessibility in the digital space because people think, okay, we've hit these checklists, but they don't do that extra quality added or value added.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good example of that particular situation again. I'm sure based on what I could see, I'm sure that people had some pointers, like this is what we need to make sure we address for accessibility. Those checklists are everywhere on the web, so that's easy to find. But, that holistic approach to an experience that would really make sense and be intuitive, that part is lacking a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Denis, we always appreciate the deep dives you do and some of the analysis you offer. Your insight is always so appreciated. Thank you for making time for us today, and all the best to you, and enjoy a lovely fall day in Montreal. Or wait, one of the last summer days in Montreal. Tomorrow fall starts, so enjoy the last day of summer in Montreal.
I will. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
That's Denis Boudreau. He is a digital accessibility specialist, and he also is the founder of Inclusive Communication. Do you want to dive into more conversations like this? Watch Now with Dave Brown weekdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on AMI TV or download the podcasts wherever you listen.